one end of South Australia to the other. I'm sure you'll agree by the time you get to the end of this podcast that it's been a fascinating listen, and I hope you learn lots from it. Sit back, relax, and listen to the first episode of The Best Time to Plant a Tree. Hello and welcome to the first edition of The Best Time to Plant a Tree. We'll have more to talk about why the podcast is called that in the podcast today. But this is an opportunity for me as South Australia's Environment Minister to dig a little bit deeper with some of our guests about relevant topics that I come across in my role as Environment Minister, and projects, programs and initiatives that I'm driving forward, as well as speaking to people who play a role in my life as Environment Minister, but also have a role in the conservation of our great state of South Australia. So to kick things off, the first guest that I was very keen to interview was Mr. John Schutz, the Chief Executive of the Department for Environment and Water in South Australia. And it's great to be able to welcome John here today. John has a background in viticulture, horticulture, conservation and land management. He's got extensive experience in the public sector, has had a range of leadership roles over the years, starting his public sector career working in the Mount Lofty Botanic Gardens, moving through various roles in the Botanic Gardens, ending up as Director of National Parks and Wildlife, and then moving through other executive positions before in October 2018 being appointed as the Chief Executive of the Department for Environment and Water. So, John, welcome to the podcast, and it's good to have you as the first ever guest. Now, John, this is my first time recording a podcast. I suspect it's the first time you have appeared on a podcast. And so we'll see how this goes. But I'm hoping that over the next half an hour or so, there'll be an opportunity for us to talk about your career, dig into some of the work that we are working on together as Minister and Chief Executive responsible for the Department for Environment and Water, and also just learn a little bit more about you and what makes you tick in this role. So let's get straight into it, John. You started your life within the public sector working in the Botanic Gardens, and that's part of my portfolio. It's a really important part of the work that I do, looking after a cultural institution in South Australia, which is, I think, 165 years old next year. Can you tell us a bit about that early part of your public sector career and how that has really shaped who you are today?
So working for the Botanic Gardens was something that really probably started, or that desire started much earlier in my life. I grew up in the Adelaide Hills. My family lived, on a farm. I had that very close relationship with the environment around us, both the natural environment as well as the agricultural pursuits of a farm with, livestock and horticulture, growing vines and fruit trees. I always have had that deep association with the natural world. I think there's something really important there, and I've just had a love of growing things from a very early age, that culminated in an opportunity to go and apply for a job in the Botanic Gardens in 1983 after Ash Wednesday, which the Mount Lofty Botanic Garden had been impacted significantly, with over 60% of the garden badly burnt, and they were employing some new base level gardeners to come in and help rebuild the garden. And I remember going for my interview at the old Botanic Gardens administration building on the corner of Hackney Road and North Terrace, and sitting in the vehicle waiting to go in to be interviewed for the role. I noticed a gardener walk across the car park in the Botanic Gardens uniform. And there was just something about wearing a uniform like that was a symbol of what you were a part of, which is much bigger than you as an individual. And of course, the Botanic Gardens and the State Herbarium, as the organisation is known, is one of those very special places built upon science, built upon culture and collections, and to be a part of that in your career when you are so connected to the environment was just something I aspired, to do. So I started there in 1983 at Mount Lofty, and the first 3 years of my working life there, we basically did nothing but clear dead timber, burnt infrastructure as a result of the fires. And the garden was closed to the public. It was hard work, but it was good work. And there was a good group of people that I was a member of the team. And, we enjoyed the work we did, and we enjoyed the progress we made at re-establishing that garden and eventually having it back open to the public.
So, John, it must be quite amazing looking back on having started in a really one of the most junior positions of the department, a very worthy position, but a very junior, hands-on, on-the-ground project and job, and having worked right your way up to be the chief executive. I have to say, when you applied for the job and having worked with you for the past 3 years, it's something that as minister I respect most about you, in that you've got immense corporate knowledge because you have worked right up through the organisation. And looking back on the last 38 years or so. I wasn't born in 1983, I have to say. I was born in 1984, so not long before I arrived on this planet. But one thing is certain, Rob Lucas was in Parliament back then, so some things don't change. But you would have seen a huge amount of change. And I guess, can you reflect on how that you progressed through the department and ended up as chief executive, and in reflecting on that, do you sometimes pinch yourself to think that you got here? Because I certainly pinch myself when I wake up in the morning and realise I'm the environment minister.
Yes, I would say I never set out to be the chief executive of the Environment Department. That wasn't on my to-do list. And to be honest, I've never really pursued a career in the sense of climbing a corporate ladder or aiming to be the next senior manager in the line. I've always looked to do the best job I can in the situation that I find myself. I was born with an outcomes focus on life. So it's about getting things done, understanding the challenge, and then looking for the most efficient way of getting that job done. I've also learnt how to enjoy working with a team, which isn't always natural, but empowering other people and getting them to share in that desire to get things done, to enjoy the work, to look for the sort of the outcome in the day-to-day routine is something that I've really enjoyed as well, because a lot of people, I think, with some encouragement from those around them, have got a lot more potential than they at times tap into. So moving through the ranks in the gardens, it was really based upon a desire just to be the best at the job that I was doing, either on a daily basis or over a period of time, and learning to work with people and empower people around me, build a good team, build a good culture. I think one of the things, though, that if I reflect back, that I've always held dear to me is that on-ground knowledge and experience, that connection with the reality of why we do what we do. I think it's easy in an institution like a public service, when you're so far removed from some of that day-to-day on-ground dealing with the community, to become removed from the reasons why we exist. And for me, I've been fortunate where I've had a strong operational stream through most of my career, and I've been able to bring that right through. And I think even now, as the CE, I would hope the organisation benefits from the fact that I do have an appreciation of the work that our staff do in many parts of the agency and across the state, because we're a statewide agency, and I can connect with them in conversation, or I can appreciate the challenges that they're dealing with. And I'd like to think that's a strength, not a weakness. Becoming the chief executive is indeed, I think, the pinnacle of my career. Starting out as I did in 1983, 3rd of October 1983, my first job was hand-weeding gazanias in the top car park of the Mount Lofty Botanic Gardens. And I'd have to say on the first day, I thought I'd made the worst decision of my life because my hands were numb from the cold. And I actually had a good job working in viticulture and wine before that. But my love of horticulture and gardens, had put me in a position where I'd applied for and won a position in the Botanic Gardens. But I've never looked back, and I've enjoyed all of it. I think the public service and indeed this department, I refer to it as a gold mine, but you've got to dig. It doesn't come of its own choice. As an individual, you need to look for the opportunities. You need to apply yourself. You need to think about the challenges, and you do need to be outcomes focused, which is not always something the public sector is, renowned for.
I'd agree with you there, John, that's for sure. But one of the things that I like about being the Environment Minister is the opportunity to do stuff that leaves a legacy. Now, many of my colleagues around the cabinet table are doing things that impact, every one of them, that impact people's lives every single day for the better, I believe. But I think my portfolio, the Department for Environment and Water, and my other constituent portfolios, SA Water, EPA, Green Industries, they all give an opportunity to leave a legacy, and a legacy that'll be there for a long, long time, not just something that'll be flung out with the change of government or the next fad. I think of Glenthorne National Park down in the southern suburbs in my electorate, that will be there protected under the National Parks and Wildlife Act, hopefully forever, and will transform that part of our city. I think projects that we're doing around greening Adelaide, planting trees that will be there for hundreds of years, cooling streets, creating habitat, expanding the reserve system across the state, or doing things like opening up our reservoirs, which will, while decisions can be made to change that, of course, but are quite transformative for particular geographical communities. And so I think you would probably agree that the ability to affect lasting, long-term legacy change is really quite substantial in this job. And I wanted just to briefly focus on that because, we've got this project that we're working on at the moment, Parks 2025. And this is a generational increase in the amount of money we're spending on our national park system. And I believe that we haven't in the last couple of decades spent as much as we should in the amenity and and nurturing those national parks. And we've got this opportunity to get in there and spend money on our parks. Record investment, touching parks all across the state. And one of the great things about the park system, it does stretch from one end of the state to the other. I think we've got 356 parks, and if you add them all together, they're about the same size as the UK in area. This Parks 2025 program is going to be transformative in my view. What excites you most about this initiative, and are there any particular projects that we are advancing through Parks 2025 that you're really keen to see get going?
I absolutely agree with you about the legacy component. And I think we are fortunate to work in a part of the public service where you can experience that in a quite positive manner, in a real way. I think there's two components to that legacy which I enjoy and I see as a part of what we create. There's the legacy for the environment and improving the environment and creating a real legacy that as a result of the work we do. And there's a legacy for the community, working with community, building capacity, building relationships with the environment that will go on beyond my role and my involvement. I've been fortunate to enjoy doing that in the Botanic Gardens and certainly in my roles in the Department, National Parks, and many other parts of the Department's business. National Parks is one of those areas that I think it's a bit like Botanic Gardens. Everybody has a sense of, based on their own experience or their own knowledge, or a desire to connect with. But not everybody actually gets to experience it. Not everybody actually gets to be a part of it. And the work we're doing through the government's initiative 2025 is making those parks far more accessible to the community. We're creating destinations and experiences that will give people both the desire to go to these regions like the Southern Flinders Ranges, and when they're there, they'll have a very good experience, a quality experience that they will enjoy, which not only will have an immediate benefit to them and the economy, the local economy, but also a lifelong benefit of connecting them to the environment. They will come to respect the environment, to understand the environment, and ultimately be a part of looking after it well after the work that we're doing. And that's a pretty special thing to be able to, one, participate in, help be a part of delivering, and then see that legacy continue on.
I think for me, Parks 2025, it's not about anything particularly flash in our national parks. I'm not keen to see, glass Taj Mahals built in particular parks. What I want to see is an enhancement of the amenity. And I think we agree very much on that. And for me, that means better structured access so people don't wander off trails and do more environmental damage, but actually have safe places to walk and good interpretive signage telling them the culture and the conservation elements of the parks, decent structured car parking, better toilets. I'm always big on toilets. I think, my mum, who's not a particularly flash person, but she wants a half decent toilet in most of the national parks she'd go to. So just providing that sense of structure and amenity, and of course, at the end of the day, most of our parks aren't going to be accessed. So, they're off the beaten track and often inaccessible. But those places that are, let's actually create that amenity and make them really pleasant places to go. Because I think if the community see us take pride in particular parks and have them nicely presented, well, they'll think, well, this government, this minister, this department, they care about our parks and they must do so for a reason. And it just creates that sense of love and care for our park system. Of all the projects we are undertaking under Parks 2025, you touched briefly on the Southern Flinders Ranges project, which is really bringing those parks, Mount Remarkable, around the reservoir there, and then moving up through towards Alligator Gorge and other areas of the protected land system there. They're trying to get more walking trails, mountain biking opportunities, really getting an economic outcome for the towns up there, Warrabara, Melrose, Wilmington, Port Pirie. It's one of my favourites. I think it's filled with potential. Are there any others that you would really looking forward to seeing unfold in the next couple of years?
What we're doing is making parks accessible and relevant. There's many parks, as we've discussed in the past, where the overwhelming majority of South Australians will never get to, places like the Simpson Desert or, the far west coast out past Ceduna. But they still have a very special purpose in a conservation effort. But parks which are closer to population centres and major regional centres, making them accessible, so giving people the ability to access them, and then creating opportunities for different experiences, and as you say, some basic but good facilities, really does make those parks relevant to the community of today. If we look at Eyre Peninsula, there's some great parks. Lincoln National Park, Coffin Bay National Park, Conservation Park, beautiful parks which people really haven't had a lot of access to over the previous years, and we're doing work to open them up in a way sensitively, discreetly. It's not that the whole park will be overrun, but creating campgrounds and access points where people can go and enjoy those parks in a way that they haven't been able to do that in the past. It'll be really good for Eyre Peninsula from a tourism perspective. It'll be great for the local community. There'll be jobs that come out of this. But more importantly, for people who don't get to experience that in any other way, it'll give them the opportunity to have that relationship with that part of our state and those beautiful environments that otherwise they would not have access to. Equally, Innis National Park at the bottom of York Peninsula, a very different park, different landscape, probably closer and more akin to the environment on Kangaroo Island than Eyre Peninsula or more the mid-north. Wonderful features, and again, within a few hours' drive. It's a little bit further than the Southern Flinders, but easily accessible from the city. So creating, again, a destination where people can go. There's facilities that people can use that supports their visit, their stay, and have a really positive experience by engaging in that part of our state is something currently that's really not available to as many people as we like. By doing that, so many more people will become champions and advocates for the environment. And it's a part of that legacy we talked about earlier. The people that will come after us, the ministers, the chief executives, the policy makers, we need them to have a relationship and understanding and appreciation of the importance of our environment and what contribution it does make to our society. And then they will also line up to look after it and secure it for the future.
And at Innis National Park, which of course we've recently co-named Dilba Garunda Innis National Park, we're spending, I think, about $3 million on improved campsites, amenities, and a great lookout at a place called Wow Hill, so-called colloquially, because you go wow when you drive up there, and we really want to give people a safe place to look out there. You mentioned Kangaroo Island. From that lookout at Wow Hill, you can actually look across Innis National Park, but also onto Kangaroo Island in the distance. Actually reminds me of the view from Scotland to Northern Ireland. Although I have been to Innis 4 times, I think, since becoming the minister, and only once have I been able to see that view. Again, that reminded me of the view from Scotland to Northern Ireland, because it was blocked out by mist and rain on the other occasions. So it'll be great to get that lookout in place and just give those parks a bit more structure and a bit more accessibility so that we can then balance that off with conservation. This is not about overrunning people with parks with people, as you say, but it's about making them safer and more accessible in a way that balances the conservation side of things. And as Environment Minister, I wrestle with that, because first and foremost, I see myself as a steward of the wild places in the state and our wildlife and our plant life and cultural heritage as well, where that falls under my responsibility, where it appears and is found within our parks. And I think that's sometimes a difficult tension, because we are trying to increase access to parks. We're trying to get our parks to be seen as a economic asset that does some heavy lifting for our state, and we're seeing our parks attract more and more people off the back of COVID and people being unable to travel overseas, exploring regional South Australia. Our park visitations up 77%, which again is a great thing, because it is taking people out largely into the regions, and they're spending money along the way, and they're falling in love. They're connecting with nature, and that can only be a good thing. But I wonder if you could reflect for a moment on striking that balance between the need for our parks to do some heavy lifting for the state's economy, to provide that tourism draw card, but getting that balance around conservation, which at the end of the day, conservation is what we're about first and foremost.
I think parks have been, like so many parts of society, on its own journey over a number of decades. National parks are born out of a desire to protect, to lock up in so many ways, special places that otherwise may well have been opened up or subjected to development, etc. We can all remember, well, many of us can remember the Gordon Franklin protests that occurred in Tasmania to protect the wilderness, and really that's where a lot of parks and a lot of that conservation effort was born, and appropriately so. But as time's gone on, what we have to appreciate is, if you look at South Australia, with over a third of the state protected under legislation, as you know as the minister, you can't just lock it up and keep people out. You can't lock it up and say it's just for a conservation effort. The conservation effort will always be the foundation to why it exists. That's fundamental and must be protected going forward. However, making it relevant to the society of the day that it's existing in, because whether we like it or not, the government of the day has to provide resources to support those parks, to maintain them, to deal with things like fire, to deal with things like pest plants, pest animals. The taxpayer of the day will be funding that, appropriately so. So therefore, making those parks relevant to that society in a way that people can connect with and see the benefit gives the government of the day, the policymakers of the day, the ability to say this is an important thing when we can do this. We don't have to do it at the expense of conservation. We can do it in a way that adds to the state's economic base, from a tourism, visitor economy, regional perspective, That's really, really important. And we can also do it in a way that educates the community, that gives the community that growing relationship with the environment so they see the need to protect the special places, which we will never open up. There's places in this park. One of the things about South Australia that I think most South Australians probably never really get to experience in the way that I have, I know you are as Minister, South Australia is blessed with so many beautiful locations as reflected through our reserve system, but also our coastlines and every region is so unique. Southeast, the Riverland, the Outback, Innis, Eyre Peninsula, they're all different and they're all so beautiful and we've got a lot of it. So giving people a relationship and encouraging people to get out there to appreciate that environment really does more to secure its protection in the long term than locking it up and people never really understand the value or the contribution it makes.
I couldn't agree more. You have to give people that opportunity to touch it and feel it and smell it and camp in it and hike in it in order to value it. In 2018, a few months after I became the minister, we had the really great opportunity to travel overseas for an international climate change summit, which was held in San Francisco. And as part of that trip, most of the trip was focused around the summit, but we had the opportunity to head up to Yosemite National Park, probably one of the most famous and most significant national parks in the world. And one of those, the many iconic national parks that make the USA so well known for its great outdoors. One of the things that struck me, and I think we shared this experience when we were there, was the pride and the respect that people had for rangers as individuals and for the National Parks and Wildlife Service of the United States of America. And I think we both came back to, I know we both came back to South Australia with a great desire to reinvigorate and refocus the role of the National Parks and Wildlife Service of South Australia. I went to the 2018 election with a commitment to increase the park ranger numbers by 20. The numbers have been whittled away down to 93 from a couple of hundred over a couple of decades. And we had been working on that increase of the ranger workforce. But after that trip to the USA, we took a very, very intentional decision to start investing in the brand, in the thing that is the National Parks and Wildlife Service, in the job and the job description that is a ranger, to try and build up that pride again. And we've seen that occur when I'm out and about in parks and every corner of the state. I'm continually told by people, that extra park ranger is making a difference, and the feedback's really positive. We're up to 138 rangers now up from 93, which I'm really happy about. But as a former director of national parks and wildlife in this state, and that's a legislated role, and you held that role for several years, what do you think the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the role of the ranger has to offer in 2021, and where can we take it from here?
You're absolutely right in regards to the recognition of the role of the respect for the ranger, a National Parks and Wildlife Ranger. It's universal. I think you can have a conversation with pretty well any nation on the earth about national parks and rangers, and at one level you can connect. I've been in Canada, I've been US, I've been through the UK, in Europe, I've been in South America, and in each of those, the role of a ranger, that uniform, it has a special place in the eyes of that community. People trust it. People, I think they have a general understanding of what they feel the role does in protecting our environment, in being on the front line of conservation, on working with community and dealing with the challenges that comes with managing parks, often in a regional or remote location. The work we're doing here to strengthen, to re-establish and grow that relationship with community, the recognition of the brand, the role that it performs in our communities. Again, a lot of that is in regional and remote locations, although growing like Glenthorne, as you said, and the other national parks and reserves we've got around Adelaide, there's a growing workforce there of rangers and I think a growing opportunity and need to connect the community through those rangers to our parks and to our conservation programs. It's a really important role. In many ways, it's the front line of our service. They are the people who they're recognised far more than the chief executive ever will be by the community as somebody that's working on behalf of the environment and on behalf of the community out there. It has an integrity built into it. You put the uniform on. It's a bit like when I first saw that Botanic Gardens uniform when I went for my job interview. I didn't know the person wearing it, had no idea. I'm not even sure to this day who it was. But the recognition of what that uniform stood for is what people respond to even before they get to talk to the person. And so we expect and we need our rangers to be out on the ground, engaging with the community, engaging with the neighbours of our parks, the volunteers who work in our parks, the other organisations, the NGO organisations that have a relationship to our conservation work, our conservation programs, responding to issues like fire that we've had so much of in the last 12, 18 months, because it's a role that the community trust. And it's also a role that carries with it all of the policy, the initiative commitments that you and the government puts in place. It's that first line of engagement and communication and interpretation and indeed compliance, because people often respect what people value, and unfortunately from time to time we have a very, very, very small number of members of the community who, for whatever reason, decide to do the wrong thing. They expect their rangers to manage that because they want to see the community value what.
And that's certainly my expectation. I'm always very keen to say that rangers should be confident to expiate. If someone's walking a dog off leash or taking firewood from a park or doing the wrong thing, they should be confident to expiate, because that message will get around the community pretty quickly. And of course, the vast majority of people want the right thing to be done. We've increased the number of rangers significantly by heading towards 50%. But increasing numbers is one thing. We need to make sure that they're actually making that tangible difference in the ground. I get good feedback about that, but how do we make sure that a ranger in 2021 is doing the job well and making that conservation difference, making that environmental difference at the front line as you described it? Because I don't want to just be the minister who increased the number of rangers. I want to be the minister that increased the number of rangers who then had a real environmental impact on the ground.
We've just discussed the role of the rangers to be on the front line. It's to be working hands-on with community, with other organisations, with our volunteers. So we've got to continually work with our ranger workforce to make sure that they're firstly understanding what their role is, what your expectation as Minister, what my expectation as Chief Executive, what the expectation of the current Director of National Parks is in delivering that agenda, and making sure they're equipped to do that in regards to their skills and the support around them, but then also holding them accountable for delivering that. I think one of the things the public sector is not always good is it's actually about the accountability, and that's not to be seen as a negative context. It's actually to be seen in a positive context, recognising the good work that our rangers do, working with our communities to make sure that they feel that they're getting a good result from the increased ranger numbers, ensuring that we get our rangers out from behind their desks, something I know you're passionate about and talked about from a very early stage of becoming Minister, stripping away lots of admin work that otherwise would stop them from being involved with and being seen to be a part of engaging community. So there's a body of work to do. It's not just about increased resources, it's also assessing the effectiveness of that, the focus of that, and the accountability around how we deliver on something being funded by the community. We're serving the community. That's what we exist for, and making sure that we are accountable to that cause.
And one of the things I'd like to leave as a legacy is a desire amongst our young people to want to be a ranger. You know, when you visit schools, when you ask kids what they want to do, for more people to say, I want to be a ranger. Interestingly, one thing I don't think will follow the US, I noticed when I was over there, their rangers are actually armed and they have a holster with a gun. I don't think we'll be going down that track in South Australia, but it's part of our workforce and part of our focus that I think we're doing well, and will continue to push the boundaries with. John, heading towards the end of our podcast now, but a couple more questions. I want to just reflect back on your own career, and you've spent much of that time working in the natural world and in the environment. Is there a project or initiative that you in the environment, in conservation, that you see as a particular highlight that's made a real tangible difference to sustainability, to the resilience of the natural world, that you can look back on and say, look, I'm really happy that I was involved and contributing towards that or initiating that?
It's like picking your favourite child, isn't it? Which one do you go with? There's so many, and I think, you know, in these roles we're privileged to be involved in so many initiatives that in and of themselves, you know, they're just another program or project. But when you look back on them, you know, they are a part of a broader agenda and a part of that legacy we talked about. One for me, and it was when I was the Director of National Parks, albeit I was only a part of a much longer, you know, nearly 30-year journey around Operation Bounceback in the Flinders Ranges, and the reintroduction of the western quoll and the brush-tailed possum to that landscape, and the importance of that to the Adnyamathanha people as far as storytelling, the importance of that in restoring and healing a landscape that had been significantly impacted over a long period of time of pest plants and pest animals and other impacts, and to be able to see those animals back in a wild natural environment after probably being missing for, you know, who knows, 70, 80, 100 years. And I tell a story when we first put the first release back into the area around Wilpena Pound, and I was there was a little bit of an event, and we've partnered up with FAME, the Foundation for Australia's Most Endangered Species. So the project's got a lot of the things that we've talked about, bringing community, working with NGOs, working with the Aboriginal community, and re-establishing, you know, those native species back into a functioning ecosystem and a habitat. And I was sitting alongside a senior Adnyamathanha woman whom I knew because I was also chair of the Flinders Ranges Co-Management Board for 6 years. And she had tears in her eyes, and I was sitting there saying, I thought she was upset. And I said to her, well, why are you crying? And she explained to me that she was crying out of happiness because she had only ever heard of the quoll in their dreaming stories. And this was the first time, and she was, you know, in the sort of more latter years of her life, this was the first time she'd actually seen that quoll back in its natural environment. And she said it made those stories so much richer, and she can now tell it to her children in a reality context, as opposed to, this is an animal that used to be here, it had disappeared 100 years earlier, and it's now a dreaming story that just tells more of the past. And I found that an incredibly powerful experience at that point, and being a part of something like that, I think, stays with you for a long time to come. So that would be one that stands out for me.
That's quite a powerful story. It has bounced back going today, is it? It still continues, doesn't it? Still
continuing. We've just renewed our agreement with FAME, who have been a wonderful partner in assisting to raise funds and advocate for the project. We're continuing on not just with the quolls and the possums and the other mitigation work, which was originally started to secure the yellow-footed rock wallaby population, which we've done many times over now in that area. And we're now looking at what's the next species we might reintroduce into that bounce back footprint to continue the healing of that land. So it's a really exciting project. It's been done without fences. It's a broad landscape scale restoration project. And it shows...
It was before its time, really.
Absolutely. And it shows if you can deal with the impacts, pest plants, pest animals, and give the environment a chance, it will recover. But it's a long-term, we talk about the legacy, it's a long-term commitment that once you start it, you've got to stay the course. 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And that's why we need people to have a relationship to the environment, to have an understanding and appreciation of the work that we're doing so that they can continue that legacy on.
And often it's not the sexy things, like the reintroduction, which is a great project, but it's actually getting those pest animals out of the landscape in the first instance, the foxes, the other predators, the ones that eat the native veg, like the goats and the deer and the camels, and you've got a list of these pest animals as long as your arm, unfortunately, but it's not often what people particularly want to hear about, but you've got to get those basics right, those foundational elements, because there's no point doing a reintroduction scheme if a fox comes along and eats your project before it's had a chance to get going.
Absolutely agree.
John, bit of a personal question here in terms of your career, but who has been the single biggest influence on your career and shaping your professional life?
That's a bit like saying who's your favourite parent.
Yeah.
They've gone the other way. Look, there's so many, and I've been very fortunate. I've had a number of people throughout my career be very supportive, and I'd like to think they recognised something in me in regards that they wanted the support and my response to that support. I'd have to say the person who probably had a significant influence was Dr. Brian Morley, who was the director of the Botanic Gardens for a lot of the time that I was there. Brian studied in the West Indies, come from the UK, really well-read individual, but he took an interest in me early on in the gardens, supported me. He challenged me. There was many conversations I remember having with him where he just didn't accept the status quo, and he challenged me even to think about my career in a way that I wasn't thinking about at the time. And I think his influence about looking at the environment differently, thinking about history, thinking about the role plants perform in people's lives, talking about gardens being a built environment and the natural world being something different. And I think, we talk about the Botanic Gardens, it's a contrived landscape. It's a reflection in many ways of the past, of culture and history, no less important. However, that's different to the way we see, particularly in Australia, the Australian bush. And, some people sort of look at them as hard and soft. Cultivated and sophisticated and, unkept and a bit wild. Yeah. And Brian was the one that helped me understand that a lot more, even before I worked for national parks, to have that appreciation. He also challenged me and helped me understand that relationship between the work we do in areas like Botanic Gardens, national parks, and the community, because he had a really good understanding of how you connected people to your work, the importance of that. I would suggest his training in the UK, much older culture, where they've dealt with these issues over a longer period of time, probably was a part of what he was able to bring to that discussion. So, and I stay in connection with Brian now. He's back in the UK at the moment. He still has a house here, which he comes to, but coronavirus has made that more difficult. Of course. And I have a great respect for him, and certainly reflect fondly on the years I worked with him. He was the first senior manager that when I was reporting to him directly, that sat me down and sent back one of my briefing notes covered in red pen. And he said to me, the best way I can teach you is show you how you can do better.
Okay.
Which is
bit of truth.
I think that's a lesson which we probably can still apply in today's public service.
People don't feel like that sort of feedback, do they? But you've got to take it on board if you want to improve.
Absolutely.
To finish up, John, I want to run through a few quicker questions, but we can expand on them potentially along the way. It's called the Quick Five. I might change this up for future interviewees, but I'm going to run through a few questions. And the first one, because of your botanic gardens background, what is your favourite flower or plant?
Well, that would have to be rhododendron, which is, people find a bit bizarre. It's because of my time at Mount Lofty Botanic Garden. There's a major collection of rhododendrons in that garden. It was badly impacted through the fires, and as an initiative when I was there, I actually took that collection a bit under my wing and spent a lot of time understanding the collection, the history of the collection, learning the plants. There's nearly 1,000 species of rhododendron. There's about 10,000, probably more now, of hybrids and clones. Rhododendrons is one of those plants that if you go back and check the history, follows the introduction of many plants from, the eastern countries, China and the Himalayas and that, through the UK, disseminated to the world. A rich history, families like the Rothschilds that set up Exbury in south of the UK. A really complex group of plants. And it led me around the world. I went to the 5th International Conference of Rhododendrons in the north of Germany. I presented a paper on the introduction of rhododendrons to Australia, and also took me to Victoria because I became the curator of the National Rhododendron Garden for a number of years back in the late 80s. So
fascinating.
It's a fascinating plant, but yeah, it'd have to be rhododendrons.
And in fact, the driveway into our little farm in the southwest coast of Scotland was lined with rhododendrons, which is quite common over there for them to be a sort of entry feature to properties on driveways and things like that. Next question, what's your favourite park in South Australia?
Oh, that's hard.
We've got 356 to pick from.
Yes, it is. Look, the one I probably visit the most and really enjoy, and I think it's a fantastic park with a lot of potential, is the Onkaparinga National Park. So it's a couple of minutes from my home. Spent a lot of time walking there. There's parts of that park that you literally can think that you're in the middle of the Flinders Ranges. It's a great park to walk in. It's got some really good flora and fauna. It's got a very active friends group, and it's 20 minutes from the city. So I think it's a great park. Beyond that, I really think Simpson Desert, which I really enjoy. I've been across this.
You've been trying to get me to visit, John. We haven't gotten there yet.
I have. I've been across the Simpson Desert a number of times, and it's just a different environment. It's so remote, going to sleep in a swag under the stars where there is no other light, watching the moon come up. It's just a special experience that, if you're inclined, everybody should experience, and I'm still working on you.
Well, we'll get there. It's a busy diary being the Environment Minister, and you need a few days to get out there. You might have already answered this, but maybe not. Best camping spot in South Australia?
Oh, there's so many, but the one which, and I've been in many, I'm fortunate I've visited many, many parts of this state, Memory Cove in Lincoln National Park. It's a really, really special place. It's got a lovely little bay, white sandy beach, small campground, and it's just a special place to go. It's
increasingly appearing on my Instagram feed. I think there's a lot more visitors there these days with the borders shut. Next question, if you weren't working in our environment, what do you think you would be doing?
I think I would be working in agriculture somewhere. I love that connection with the environment, whether it's, the natural environment, the natural world, or, agriculture, horticulture. That relationship with the earth and plants, I just find something quite compelling. I think as humans, we increasingly are detached from the natural world. I think, there's all sorts of consequences from that. And I've always looked at, as my roles have become more and more senior, and in many ways I've become, more and more detached myself from being directly involved with the environment. I look at the environment as the great leveller. I think in these roles we get wound up like a piece of fencing wire, to use an agricultural sort of, example, and we get tighter and tighter and tighter. When you get into the environment, the reverse happens. You get unwound. You sort of, it just levels you out, and you become much more calm and settled. So I just love that relationship with the environment. And if I wasn't working in what I'm doing, and I've been fortunate to, continue in a path that I've had elements of agriculture and horticulture and the environment, I would be working in agriculture somewhere.
So something fairly similar.
Absolutely.
Same vein. Name the South Australian who you think has had the biggest impact on our natural environment.
Oh, there's so many. Lots of names you could go with, Warren Benithan or Barbara Hardy. But the one I think is Walter Gooch, because Walter Gooch was the one back in 1881 who, when the government of the day wanted to sell off parts of the government farm and one of the governor's residence up at Belair, Walter Gooch, with some of his colleagues, was the one who actually rallied and said to the government of the day, you can't sell this. It's an important area from a conservation perspective, and he kicked up a fuss. That was 1881. I think 3 years later, or 2 years later, 1883, they passed an Act of Parliament to stop it being sold. I think then in 1888, it was declared a public park. And then in, when was it, an Act of Parliament was passed called the National Parks Act in 1892. So Walter Gooch, for whatever reason, whether it was just because his backyard and it was a special place and he had that relationship, or whether he was a visionary.
Was he a significant South Australian, do we know? I haven't heard of Walter Gooch, and many of our listeners probably haven't either.
No, well, he along with some others, were clearly able to rally, some communities.
And back then, to be able to do that, you'd have to have some influence.
And some influence, and influence the politics to the point where he stopped the government wanting to sell off these parcels of land. And also was able to influence them to actually pass an Act of Parliament and say that it wouldn't be sold, was his first outcome. And then he continued to agitate with some other people to then get, it declared a public park, so a public place. So that was before it was called a national park. And then, of course, he had the National Parks Act in 1892. It's not a bad effort. And Gooch was key in each of those steps, albeit he had other people being a part of it. So the Gooch name, still exists around Belair and had, a relationship to, some of the work of Cleland and Cleland's work. So notable in a community sense, I think much more than a political sense, but certainly somebody who, we talked about legacy, we talked about connection to the environment and people wanting to protect it for the future. And he did all of that back in 1881.
We got our first national park and in fact, the second in the nation.
Well, Belair then become, as you rightly say, Belair become the second national park in Australia. So that's, for me, pretty important individual, South Australian, whose influence has continued and continues to this day.
Fascinating. I need to learn more about Mr. Gooch. Finishing off and focusing on the fact that we've called this podcast The Best Time to Plant a Tree. And the reason for that is, I often talk about being a practical conservationist, a hands-on environmentalist. And there's an old saying that the best time to plant a tree is 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 200 years ago. You put in your whatever historic year that you want. But the second best time to plant a tree is right now. And the spirit of and motivation that drives me around being the environment minister is what can we do now as individuals or as individuals coming together as a collective to benefit and improve and nurture our natural environment. And so my last question for today is, what is one thing that you think our listeners can do today for our natural environment that will make a tangible difference both now but even more so in the future?
Build a relationship to the natural world. Connect with the environment. Understand its importance. We will continue to protect our special places, clearly, but we need to educate the community around the value of them and the role that they perform, whether it's from a pure conservation perspective, which is critical, or whether it's from a recreational perspective, which is important, whether it's from an economic basis when we talk about tourism, and that relevance to the society of the day. People need to educate and connect with the environment because then they will contribute to it. They'll understand why ministers make the decisions they make. They'll understand the role of the Director of National Parks or Rangers. They will become a part of a solution as opposed to so often not because they set out to do that. They'll have a negative impact without understanding really what's going on. So building that relationship, educating themselves, and getting out and enjoy the environment in a way that they start to value. As you've always said, you can't value something you can't touch. You won't value something if you don't have a relationship to it. And I think that's one thing every person should strive to do.
So we need to keep on creating those opportunities to get out there and to explore and to immerse ourselves in the natural world. John Schutz, Chief Executive of the Department for Environment and Water in South Australia, thank you for joining me to record our inaugural podcast at the best time to plant a tree. Thank you.
Thank you very much.